dad in the house fire. This is one of my dad's stories about when he was a kid. This is the pastor and Mrs. Arms, my grandparents. That's my dad there with a bonnet on. And this story was just not too many years later, but my dad was a boy by then. And Grandma was busy. She was pregnant with my Aunt Lois, and she was just about at the end of the pregnancy, and there were some problems, and she was in the hospital. So the pastor and the kids were all on their own. It was Sunday morning. Everybody was running around trying to get ready for church. I mean, normally, Grandpa, all he had to do was get himself dressed and go over his sermon notes. But in this case, he was having to do all his jobs and all her jobs, including ironing. But he got everything done, and they all got loaded up, and they got to church in time, and they had Sunday school, and the pastor did his sermon. Now, I'm not going to say that my grandpa was perhaps not the most exciting pastor in the world, but, you know. But right in the middle of the sermon, something really unusual happened. A man came running right into the church, and he said, pardon me, pastor. And my grandpa stopped right in mid-sentence, and what in the world's going on? The pastor's house is on fire, the guy yells. And this really isn't the parsonage, but you get the idea. Well, the church just cleared out. They had volunteer firemen in that town. It was just a little town in South Dakota. And half a dozen of them were right there in the congregation. Well, everybody runs over to the parsonage, and they pull open the door, and smoke just gushes out. My dad said so much smoke came out of that door, it came out in the form of a big rectangle. The firemen were daunted. They were scared to death. Every time they opened a window or a door, smoke just poured out. And finally, they said it was too dangerous. They didn't want to have to go in there, and they would just try to make sure no other buildings caught on fire, but the whole parsonage was going to be lost. Well, my grandpa wouldn't have it. He said, I'm going in, and darned if he did. He put his head down and he ran right into the house. And my dad sees this. My dad's just a kid, but he can't stand it. And he pulls himself away from the people who are holding on to him, and he runs after his dad right into the burning house. That's my dad when he's just a kid. The entire house was full of smoke. My dad said he couldn't believe it. When he got in there, he could not see a darn thing. And he ended up crawling on his hands and knees on the ground and yelling, Dad, Dad. And finally, he bumped into his dad. His dad was also on his hands and knees. And he felt my grandpa's shoes. And Grandpa was, man, get out of here, get out of here. This house is full of smoke. And my dad said, I'm not going, you know. And so, Grandpa told him, it's not a fire, it's just a clothes basket. And it turned out when he'd been doing the ironing, he forgot to unplug the iron, and the iron had burned right through the ironing board and dropped into the clothes basket. And it's amazing how much smoke poured out of that clothes basket. It was sort of smoldering, but it really wasn't burning down the house, but it was producing an ungodly amount of smoke. My dad wouldn't leave, and so finally Grandpa told him, well, open some windows, you know. So my dad, he managed to get a window open downstairs, and then he thought he better go upstairs and open an upstairs window, but he got about halfway up the staircase, and he passed out. And when my dad woke up, the world was upside down. Grandpa had a hold of him by the ankles and had him stuck out a window in the fresh air so he could breathe again. And that's how they saved the parsonage. Oh, meanwhile, Grandma gave birth to my Aunt Lois. I like a happy ending.